There comes a moment when the world loses its color. The things that once pulled you forward no longer call your name. Achievements feel hollow. Pleasure feels distant. Even desire grows quiet. Most people panic here. They think something is broken inside them. They try to force excitement back into their lives, not realizing that this emptiness is not a collapse, but a threshold. When nothing excites you anymore, it is often because your soul has outgrown the life you are living. This numbness is not laziness. It is not depression by default. It is the psyche withdrawing its energy from forms that no longer reflect who you are becoming. The inner world is saying, asterisk, this no longer fits asterisk. And so the old motivations begin to die. The rewards that once controlled you lose their power. The noise of the external world fades, not because you are weak, but because something deeper is preparing to speak. This is the phase where identity dissolves. The masks you wore for approval, survival, and belonging start to feel heavy. You may feel lost, unmotivated, detached, even empty. But emptiness is not the absence of meaning. It is the clearing of space. Just as a forest must burn before new life can emerge, the psyche must sometimes strip away excitement to break your addiction to stimulation. You are being called inward. Away from distraction, away from borrowed desires, away from the life you were conditioned to want. What replaces excitement at this stage is not pleasure, but truth. You may notice a strange stillness growing inside you, a silence that feels uncomfortable, yet honest. In this silence, you are no longer driven by chasing, proving, or escaping. You begin to sense that something essential is forming beneath the surface, even if you cannot yet name it. This is where many turn back, afraid of the void, but those who stay, those who endure the quiet without filling it with noise, emerge transformed. They no longer seek excitement to feel alive. They move with purpose instead of impulse. Depth replaces dopamine. Meaning replaces motion. When nothing excites you anymore, it is often because you are standing at the edge of becoming someone real. Emotional numbness appears when the old identity can no longer hold the soul's growth. And this numbness is often misunderstood as failure, weakness, or loss, when in truth it is a signal that the inner structure you have been living from has reached its limit. The personality you built to survive, to belong, to be praised, or to be safe, once served a purpose. But the psyche does not remain loyal to what has expired. When growth presses from within, and the outer identity cannot stretch any further, sensation begins to dull. Joy fades not because life has become empty, but because the vessel carrying your life has become too small. This numbness is not sudden. It arrives gradually, quietly, almost politely. First, excitement weakens. Then motivation follows. What once felt meaningful now feels repetitive, mechanical, even absurd. You may still perform the same actions, speak the same words, chase the same goals, yet something essential is missing. The emotional charge that once fueled your movement has withdrawn. This withdrawal is intentional. The psyche conserves energy when it knows that continuing forward in the same direction would be a betrayal of deeper development. An old identity is made of habits, beliefs, roles, and expectations that were formed in response to earlier conditions. It is shaped by childhood needs, cultural pressures, unresolved fears, and unconscious agreements. As long as this identity aligns with inner growth, emotions flow freely through it. But when growth demands expansion beyond these limits, emotion can no longer pass through the old form. The result is numbness, not as punishment, but as protection. Feeling deeply while living falsely would create unbearable inner conflict. Emotional numbness is the soul's way of saying that the story you are telling yourself about who you are is no longer true. The psyche refuses to animate a lie indefinitely. When the distance between the inner self and the outer persona becomes too wide, feeling shuts down. This is why numbness often appears during periods of transition, even when nothing visibly tragic has happened. You may have achieved what you were told to want, built the life you once imagined, or reached a long, sought milestone, only to feel strangely hollow afterward. At this stage, many attempt to fix numbness by adding stimulation. More work, more entertainment, more validation, more noise. But numbness is not cured by excess. It is deepened by it. The psyche is not asking for more input. It is asking for alignment. Emotional deadness is a refusal to continue living unconsciously. It is an inner strike against repetition without meaning. The old identity resists this process. It fears dissolution. It whispers that numbness means something is wrong, that you must return to what once worked, that you should force yourself to feel again. But emotion cannot be commanded. It returns only when the inner and outer worlds move toward coherence. Until then, numbness acts as a pause, a suspension, a necessary silence. In this silence, something subtle begins to happen. Without emotional distraction, you start to see yourself more clearly. The roles you play feel artificial. The ambitions you chased feel borrowed. The values you defended feel inherited rather than chosen. Numbness strips away illusion not by attacking it, but by starving it of energy. What remains after the emotional charge is gone reveals what was never truly yours. This is why emotional numbness often coincides with existential questioning. Who am I without my goals? Who am I without approval? Who am I without striving? These questions arise not because you are lost, but because the inner compass is recalibrating. Growth demands disorientation before direction. The psyche dismantles the old map before revealing a new one. There is grief in this phase, even if it is not felt in the usual way. You are mourning a version of yourself that can no longer exist. The numbness protects you from feeling the full weight of this loss all at once. It allows the old identity to fade gently rather than shatter violently. This is not regression. It is a controlled descent into deeper truth. Those who misunderstand this phase often diagnose themselves as broken and rush to rebuild the old identity. They return to familiar patterns, familiar roles, familiar desires, and numbness recedes temporarily. But it always returns, stronger than before, because growth cannot be permanently silenced. The soul remembers what the mind tries to forget. If numbness is allowed to do its work, it becomes a threshold rather than a prison. Beneath the absence of feeling, new values are forming, new instincts are awakening. A more honest orientation toward life is assembling quietly. This process cannot be rushed because what is forming has never existed before. It is not an improved version of the old self, but a different configuration altogether. The danger is not numbness itself, but mistaking it for emptiness rather than incubation. When you stop trying to force emotion and instead listen to what the numbness is protecting, you begin to sense the contours of a truer self emerging beneath the surface. This self is not driven by excitement or fear, but by necessity and meaning. It does not seek constant stimulation, because it moves from inner coherence rather than outer reward. Emotional numbness marks the moment when the psyche withdraws support from a life that no longer matches its depth, when the old identity can no longer carry the weight of who you are becoming, and the soul pauses feeling not because it has nothing to feel, but because it is preparing to feel from a deeper place, one that has not yet fully taken shape, one that requires the old self to loosen its grip, one that begins to breathe only when you stop pretending, stop forcing, stop clinging, and allow the outdated structure to dissolve into silence. Loss of excitement is the psyche withdrawing energy from outdated desires and roles, and this withdrawal is not accidental, nor is it a sign that life has lost meaning, but rather an indication that meaning is no longer found where it once lived. The inner world does not argue or explain itself in words. It speaks through shifts in energy, attention, and desire. When excitement fades, it is because the psyche has stopped investing in certain patterns, goals, and identities that no longer serve its deeper direction. Desire is not random. What you want is shaped by unconscious agreements made long ago. Some desires were adopted to gain love, safety, status, or belonging. Others were formed to escape fear, shame, or emptiness. As long as these desires are aligned with growth, they feel alive, they energize action, they give a sense of direction. But when growth demands a new orientation, the psyche begins to pull its energy back. What once felt urgent now feels optional. What once felt thrilling now feels repetitive. The loss of excitement is the first visible sign of this inner reorganization. People often assume excitement is a requirement for life, but excitement is only a phase-specific fuel. It is useful for building, proving, chasing, and establishing identity. Once these tasks are complete, excitement becomes inefficient. It keeps you moving in circles. The psyche knows when a chapter has ended, even when the conscious mind refuses to accept it. So it removes the emotional reward that kept you attached to that chapter. This withdrawal of energy can feel unsettling because it exposes how much of life was driven by emotional payoff. When the payoff disappears, you are left with bare action, stripped of justification. You may still go to the same places, talk to the same people, and pursue the same goals, but the internal engine is gone. This is not punishment. It is a recalibration. The psyche is redirecting energy away from roles that have become hollow and toward possibilities that have not yet reached consciousness. Outdated desires often persist long after their usefulness has expired. They remain as habits rather than needs. The psyche cannot force you to abandon them directly, so it makes them uninteresting. Excitement fades so that attachment weakens. Without excitement, you begin to question why you are doing what you are doing. This questioning is the beginning of liberation. Roles function the same way. Every role you inhabit carries a certain emotional reward. The role of the achiever brings validation. The caretaker brings purpose. The rebel brings intensity. The rescuer brings moral superiority. When these roles no longer match the inner truth, the psyche withdraws energy from them. You may still perform the role, but it feels empty. The applause does not satisfy. The responsibility feels heavy. The intensity feels forced. This is not because the role is wrong in itself, but because it has become outdated for who you are now. Loss of excitement often precedes a period of confusion. Without clear desire, direction blurs. The mind panics and searches for replacement excitement. New goals, new distractions, new identities. But the psyche resists quick substitutions. It does not want a new costume placed over the same structure. It wants transformation at the root. This is why new pursuits often feel briefly exciting, then quickly dull again. The withdrawal continues until the underlying orientation changes. There is a moral misunderstanding surrounding excitement. Society praises those who are constantly motivated, driven, passionate. Loss of excitement is labeled as apathy or failure. But the psyche is not interested in performance. It is interested in integration. It will happily dismantle motivation if motivation is keeping you aligned with a false self. When excitement disappears, what remains is raw attention. You begin to notice the mechanics of your life rather than being carried by them. You see how often you were chasing feeling rather than truth. You see how many choices were made to avoid stillness. This awareness is uncomfortable because it removes the anesthesia of enthusiasm, but it is also clarifying. The withdrawal of energy creates a vacuum, and vacuums demand resolution. Either you will refill it with noise, or you will allow it to deepen into insight. If allowed, this vacuum becomes a space where new values can form. Values not based on excitement, but on necessity, not on stimulation, but on meaning, not on image but on alignment. At this stage, life may feel flat, but this flatness is deceptive. Beneath it, the psyche is reorganizing its hierarchy. What matters is being reordered. What calls you is being refined. This process happens in darkness because premature excitement would pull you back into old patterns. The psyche withholds pleasure so that clarity can emerge. The loss of excitement is also a test. It asks whether you are willing to continue living without immediate reward, whether you can remain present without being entertained, whether you can listen without being seduced. Those who pass this test develop a different relationship with life. They no longer depend on excitement to move. They move because something inside demands expression. When the psyche finishes withdrawing energy from what is outdated, excitement does not return in the same form. It is quieter, steadier, less dramatic. It is replaced by a sense of rightness rather than thrill. But this new orientation cannot emerge while the old desires are still being fed. The loss of excitement is the necessary starvation of an obsolete inner economy, the closing of a chapter not through force, but through indifference, the psyche gently but firmly removing its investment from roles and desires that once defined you but can no longer contain the direction of your becoming. Inner emptiness is not decay, but a clearing space for deeper meaning. And this distinction is crucial because most people interpret emptiness as something pathological, something to be fixed, avoided, or escaped. From the outside, emptiness looks like lack, absence, or collapse. From the inside, it is often experienced as silence, stillness, and suspension. But this silence is not dead. It is active, intentional, and purposeful. It is the psyche creating distance from noise so something essential can emerge without distortion. Emptiness appears when the inner world withdraws its projections from the outer world. What once carried meaning no longer reflects it back to you. Objects lose their emotional charge, goals lose their urgency, relationships lose their symbolic weight. This feels unsettling because much of identity is built on reflected meaning. When the mirror goes blank, the sense of self begins to waver. But this blankness is not destruction. It is the removal of false reflections. The psyche cannot reveal deeper meaning while the surface is crowded. As long as the mind is filled with borrowed values, inherited beliefs, and conditioned desires, there is no room for the authentic voice to speak. Emptiness clears this internal clutter. It dismantles certainty. It dissolves assumptions. It removes the scaffolding that once supported the ego's version of reality. What remains is not chaos, but openness. This openness feels dangerous because it lacks structure. The mind wants definitions, labels, explanations. Emptiness offers none. It demands patience rather than control. Most resist this phase because it feels like regression. Productivity drops, motivation fades, direction blurs, but growth does not always move forward in visible ways. Sometimes it moves inward, downward, and backward through forgotten layers of the self. Emptiness often follows loss, but not always an external one. Sometimes what is lost is an illusion, an imagined future, a belief about who you were supposed to be, a narrative that gave coherence to suffering. When such structures dissolve, meaning collapses temporarily. This collapse is not failure, it is deconstruction. The psyche is dismantling meaning that was no longer alive. There is a subtle intelligence in emptiness. It slows you down when speed would keep you unconscious. It quiets desire when desire would keep you distracted. It isolates you when belonging would keep you conforming. In emptiness, you are forced to confront what remains when all justification is stripped away. This confrontation is uncomfortable because it removes the props that made life feel certain. Many mistake emptiness for depression, but they are not the same. Depression collapses energy without direction. Emptiness conserves energy with intent. In emptiness, there is still awareness. There is still observation. There is still a quiet sense that something is happening beneath the surface. You may feel unmotivated, but not hopeless. Disengaged, but not destroyed. Empty, but strangely alert. This stage requires endurance rather than action. There is nothing to fix, nothing to optimize, nothing to chase. Attempts to prematurely fill the emptiness often delay its purpose. Noise becomes seductive, distraction feels necessary, but every attempt to escape emptiness strengthens the fear of it. The psyche learns that silence is dangerous, and meaning retreats further into the unconscious. If emptiness is allowed to remain, it begins to transform, not by adding content, but by revealing depth. Thoughts slow, perception sharpens. You begin to notice subtle reactions, long, ignored instincts, quiet preferences that were buried beneath ambition or obligation. Meaning begins to arise not as excitement, but as resonance. Certain ideas feel heavy with truth. Certain paths feel quietly inevitable. In emptiness, the ego loses its dominance. Without goals to chase or roles to perform, the ego has nothing to defend. This creates a rare opportunity for integration. Parts of the psyche that were previously suppressed begin to surface. Old memories, unresolved emotions, forgotten longings, not dramatically, but gently. Emptiness provides the safety for these fragments to reappear without being immediately judged or used. This is why emptiness often feels lonely. The external world no longer mirrors your inner experience. Conversations feel shallow. Social rituals feel performative. You are no longer fully participating in the collective dream. But this isolation is temporary. It is the distance required to see the dream clearly, to recognize which parts of it were never yours. Meaning that emerges from emptiness is different from meaning that is adopted. It is quieter, less impressive, harder to explain. It does not announce itself. It does not demand validation. It feels obvious rather than exciting. This meaning does not push you forward aggressively. It pulls you inward steadily. It aligns rather than motivates. Emptiness teaches discernment. You learn the difference between what stimulates you and what sustains you, between what distracts you and what grounds you, between what flatters the ego and what feeds the soul. This discernment cannot be learned through accumulation. It is learned through subtraction. The fear of emptiness is rooted in the fear of losing control. In emptiness, you cannot manage outcomes or predict direction. You must wait without guarantee. But it is precisely this waiting that allows deeper meaning to form without contamination. Meaning that is rushed is usually borrowed. Meaning that is waited for is earned. As emptiness deepens, it begins to feel less like absence and more like potential, like soil after harvest, like night before dawn. There is nothing visible yet, but the conditions are right. The psyche does not reveal new meaning until the old has been fully released. Any attempt to hold onto fragments of past identity delays the emergence of what wants to be born. Inner emptiness is the space between who you were and who you are becoming, the pause between exhale and inhale, the silence that makes the next sound possible, the clearing where deeper meaning can take root without being shaped by expectation, without being forced into form, without being used. To maintain an identity that no longer exists, stillness replaces stimulation as the true self begins to form. And this transition is often misunderstood because modern life conditions the mind to equate movement with progress and stimulation with vitality. When stimulation fades, people assume something has gone wrong, but stillness is not stagnation. It is a different mode of consciousness, one that emerges when the psyche no longer needs noise to distract it from itself. This stillness is not imposed from outside. It arrives naturally when the inner world withdraws from compulsive engagement with the external one. Stimulation thrives on reaction. It pulls attention outward, fragments awareness, and keeps the psyche occupied with surfaces. Stillness, by contrast, gathers attention inward. It does not entertain, it does not seduce, it waits. When stimulation loses its grip, the nervous system begins to settle. The constant need for novelty weakens. Silence becomes tolerable, then familiar, then necessary. This is not boredom. It is the mind returning to its own depth. In stillness, the true self does not announce itself dramatically. It does not arrive with excitement or certainty. It forms gradually, almost invisibly. The ego, accustomed to directing life through desire and control, feels displaced. Without stimulation, it loses its primary tools. It can no longer motivate through reward or fear. This creates discomfort, because the ego interprets loss of control as danger. But beneath this discomfort, a quieter intelligence begins to organize experience. Stillness exposes how much of life was lived reactively. How many choices were responses rather than expressions? When stimulation falls away, these reactions lose momentum. You begin to see impulses arise without immediately acting on them. Thoughts appear and dissolve. Emotions pass through without demanding resolution. This space between impulse and action is where the true self begins to take shape. It is not defined by what it wants, but by what it observes. The true self is not built through effort. It emerges through subtraction. As stimulation fades, unnecessary desires weaken, compulsive behaviors lose urgency, social performances feel artificial, the psyche stops scattering itself across endless inputs and begins to consolidate. This consolidation feels like stillness, but it is actually integration. Fragmented parts of the personality begin to align around something deeper than preference or habit. Stillness also brings clarity. Without constant stimulation, perception sharpens. You notice subtle tensions in your body, quiet aversions in your mind, faint intuitions that were previously drowned out. These signals were always present, but stimulation kept them buried. The true self speaks softly. It cannot be heard in noise. Stillness is not only the condition for its emergence, but its native language. Many resist this phase by reintroducing stimulation. They fill silence with content, schedules, conversations, plans. This resistance delays formation of the true self because it keeps identity externalized. The true self cannot form while attention is constantly pulled outward. It requires sustained contact with inner experience, even when that experience feels empty or unclear. Stillness demands endurance, not effort. In stillness, time feels different. Urgency dissolves. The future loses its grip. You are less driven by anticipation and less haunted by regret. This shift allows a deeper orientation to develop, one not based on outcomes but on alignment. Actions that arise from this place feel inevitable rather than forced. You do them not because they excite you, but because not doing them feels dishonest. The true self is not concerned with image. It does not seek validation. It does not need constant affirmation. These needs belong to the ego, which relies on stimulation to confirm its existence. Stillness deprives the ego of this confirmation, forcing it to loosen its dominance. As the ego recedes, a more stable center begins to form, one that does not fluctuate with praise or rejection. This process can feel isolating. Stillness creates distance from the collective rhythm. Conversations feel rushed. Social expectations feel loud. You may feel out of sync with others who are still driven by stimulation. This does not mean you are superior or separate, but that your orientation has shifted. The true self does not reject the world, but it no longer dissolves into it. Stillness also reveals fear. Without stimulation to mask it, Unresolved anxieties surface. Old memories emerge. Suppressed emotions ask for attention. This is not regression. It is integration. The true self forms not by avoiding darkness, but by holding it without being overwhelmed. Stillness provides the container for this holding. It allows fear to exist without dictating behavior. As stillness deepens, you begin to trust it. You stop interpreting silence as emptiness and start recognizing it as presence. Decisions arise more slowly, but with greater precision. You feel less compelled to explain yourself, less pressured to perform. The true self does not need to announce its existence. It expresses itself through coherence rather than intensity. Stimulation excites, but it also scatters. Stillness grounds, but it also concentrates. In this concentration, values reorganize. What matters becomes simpler. What does not matter falls away naturally. You are no longer pulled in multiple directions because your center has weight. This weight is not heaviness, but gravity. Others may feel it without you saying a word. The formation of the true self is not a single moment, but a gradual settling. Like sediment falling to the bottom of water once it is no longer disturbed. Stillness allows this settling. Over time, your actions reflect something consistent rather than reactive. You become less interested in becoming someone and more interested in being aligned with what already exists within you. Stillness does not eliminate desire, but it refines it. Desires that survive stillness are not impulsive. They are rooted. They feel less like wants and more like obligations to an inner truth. These desires do not fluctuate with mood. They persist quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to be expressed. When stillness replaces stimulation, life may appear simpler from the outside, but internally it is richer, denser, more real. You are no longer driven by what excites you, but guided by what resonates. The true self continues to form not through noise, not through urgency, not through performance, but through sustained presence, through silence that listens, through stillness that holds, through a depth that no longer needs to announce itself to be real.